What's going on, everybody, and welcome to episode 14 of Tallboys
and Trackmasters.
What do you think, buddy?
I've just been getting my bike ready and my body ready for this experience that we're going to go have this weekend.
I think it's definitely going to be a experience for sure.
Bring your snorkel, bring your rain gear.
Yeah, I think it's hilarious. We both went out a little bit of a ride Sunday, and I want to try out my new vented Noru gear, which is not going to be necessary this coming weekend at all.
No, you're going to want as little airflow as possible.
Yep, I'll be doubled up, layered up, and probably got some hand warmers stuck down in my boots and stuff. And we're definitely excited for this episode. Like I said, it's episode 14, and we're going to talk to the man, the myth, the legend, Lannie Hooiser with Adventure Horizons. And I can't think of a better guest to interview right before a good portion of the FDSR crew is going to go down and do his infamous route, the Tour De Coalfields. So without further ado, let's add him on. What's going on, man?
Hey, guys. How are you all?
Doing all right, buddy. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Thanks for having me. Very excited.
Yeah. Well, anytime we got some guys that are local dudes in the industry that are very well known for putting together some amazing routes, we definitely want to chat with you for sure.
Cool.
All right, buddy. Well, we'll get started right off the bat here, man. We'll just start from the top there. Where were you born and raised at?
I was born in a little town in Logan County, Man, West Virginia. And,
okay.
And then was originally from Wyoming County, so there's not any hospitals in Wyoming County, so you either had to go to Beckley or Logan County to get hatched. So that's they chose Logan County, and then we moved to Mercer County. So that's where I spent my teenage years and graduated from Pikeview High School right outside of Princeton. And then, I was a firefighter for a few years for the city of Princeton, Bluefield, and then went in the coal mines for a while and went back to school. So we moved down here to Roanoke. Roanoke, Virginia is actually where I live at now.
Okay.
And, I'm in the mine safety business. So, I'm back in West Virginia all the time, Southwestern Virginia. And, all my family's still back home. So, so I get best of both worlds. I get the really nice Blue Ridge Mountains is going up through the Shenandoah Valley where I live. Plus I get to go back home and hit, what I cut my teeth on.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, it's definitely a lot of coal mines down that area that I'm sure need your assistance. I was kind of in that realm as well, kind of going through when I got kind of dropped out of college. I mean, did a little bit of work for Garrett Mine Slaves up in Pennsylvania,
up in Maryland,
it's Bailey coal mine.
Oh, you worked okay.
Yeah, and then did some stuff, some out by work and some scoop driving, buggy driving at Blacksville too, and then I ended up being the warehouse manager there for 5 years. So yeah, definitely familiar with the coal industry there.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So how did you get your start into riding?
Well, I grew up riding from the time I could walk, back home, especially in Southern West Virginia, you was either on a bike, full wheeler. It was the days before side by sides, of course. But, that was not a lot of stuff to do in the coal fields, and, riding was one of them. And, we had plenty of riding to do, a lot of the stuff that people come and travel all over the world to hit, the Hatfield McCoy trails. We rode that when I was a child, before the the trails were even thought of. So know a lot of not all the areas. Not real familiar with the Mingo County area. As far as the trails go, but the Logan County trails. I used to work in Logan County. In fact, the Rock House. I worked in Rock House Creek, so all of those properties. I was pretty familiar with, and just rode, and then moved to Roanoke. So made the there's not a lot of trails down here like we have back home. Just dirt after dirt after dirt. There's a lot of roads down here, but they're all national forests. So that's kind of how I made the transition from dirt to dual sport / adventure riding. It's kind of a necessity. If you wanted to go out and have a good time, you had to have something with a plate on it.
Yep. Yeah, it's kind of a natural progression, especially for guys like me that grew up racing every single weekend. And you find out that once you get a lot of the responsibilities with work and kids, and that $5 wooden plaque doesn't mean as much as it used to whenever you got to go to work the next day. So the old slow, fat, retired guys start to get into the dual sport adventure side of things.
That's right. When you work in the coal mines, your time off is precious, and it's just one thing to go race. I had a short-lived racing career myself, and to go and have to take your one day off and go race and deal with that, and then still have everything else that you have to take care of in life. It just you have to make a choice there.
Yeah, your time is definitely precious, man, and it's that chasing the carrot, so to speak, when it comes to racing isn't really worth it for me anymore. I know, Trevor, you got your start out just kind of riding around with dual sports, not really racing.
Yeah, so I was sitting at my granddad's porch one day, and there was a bike that went by that had giant fat tires under it. And I went home, started researching, and found out what it was. It was a Yamaha T-Dub. Got one of those, messed around on it for a little while, went from that to a Kawasaki. That's when I met these guys with FDSR. I was actually supposed to go on a coffee date with my girlfriend when I passed them, and pulled in the parking lot they were in, and I'm going from Fairmont to Canaan with them, and a group of guys I didn't know. And the rest has been history. But yeah, as far as racing or anything like that, I never got into it, and it's too late in the game now. I don't really have an interest in it either. I don't have a really competitive personality in that regard. I just like to go out trail ride and have fun.
Yeah. Lannie, what's some of your other hobbies besides riding and stuff? What else you like to do?
I like collecting guns. That's one of my favorite things to do. I like collecting them. I don't necessarily shoot a lot, but I do like collecting guns, and pretty boring. Motorcycles is about it for me right now. I like old vehicles. I have a Camaro that's a vintage Camaro that I like, and then I have some pretty eclectic taste. I have a '59 model Mack truck that I'm restoring, so that's a little bit out of a little bit out of the ordinary.
Yeah, wow, that's awesome, man. Yeah, I know about kind of oddball stuff. I always was a fan of sleeper vehicles or off the wall kind of travel stuff. I know my old man's got I think it's a 48 or 49 Packard limousine that he's currently restoring right now. Nothing with there.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. So I don't know if everybody in our groups heard of your company there, Adventure Horizons, but once you kind of detail about how that came about and how you got together. I know you have a couple different guys that you work with, and just kind of how the start of that came about.
So, Adventure Horizons is more of a hobby type thing. It's not really it's not what I'm making a living off of. So it's
right.
It allowed me to have a little bit of the word I'm trying to say here, a little bit of validity when you try to do something, instead of just there's Lannie and there he is, and just, he'll take you for a good ride, which, that's fine too, but it does give you a little bit more validity. And then coming up with something where you could share routes that I have and have a place for it. It was kind of a natural progression to do that. So, I saw a lot of these guys, it seems like, with overlanding right now, it's kind of just a buzzword, back in the old days, it was camping and four-wheeling, it was not
turns out that I was overlanding with my grandparents when I was like 4 years old.
That's right. It sounds cool. It sounds a lot cooler than I'm just going out. Yeah. I mean,
we just call it car camping.
So, that's kind of that big buzz that's going on right now. So, I saw a lot of people coming up with these routes, and, your Sam, with the Tat, and then GPS Kevin, on his back, and then the BDR come out. So, I was, my personality is that's fine, but I can do it better, because I enjoy making the routes as much as I do.
Yeah.
Actually riding. I love riding, but you can only ride so much. But designing routes, I can do that anytime. I can do it sitting on the toilet with Gaia or whatever
I
else.
love Gaia GPS. I started using it about 8 months ago, and I'm a big fan of it.
Yeah, that's what we use. So and I like part of my job with safety is research, and I enjoy that. So when you put a good route together, it's not just, well, I'm putting a route and this is what it is. It's, you need to research that route. That's the thing. You need to do your due diligence and find out, is it public? Can I send somebody here? It's different. It's one thing just to, hey, take a bunch of guys and them follow you. That's one thing. But when you're putting a route out there and you have somebody that's not from the region, maybe across the country, and they're riding, it needs to be right. You really don't need to put them somewhere where they may either get hurt or, get them, in a questionable area. So I enjoy that as much as I do almost riding.
Well, it's great that you're doing your due diligence to make sure that you're putting together routes that are viable and not going through any private land or anything like that. Because I know on Adventure Rider, for a period of time, there was a guy selling routes went through like National Forest over towards like Mon National Forest near Elkins. I grew up in that area and I'm pretty familiar with it. A lot of his routes involved locked gates that are locked year round that I've never seen open in, the 28 years I've been alive. So definitely.
Well, you run into that in. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I was done with that thought.
When you do just make routes on Gaia or Google Earth, and you do run into that a lot. You do run into gates that's never been open because you're just sitting there looking at a satellite image, but you actually have to go ride them. I mean, exactly. I may go make a route, and then I have to lay eyes before I publish it. I have to go lay eyes on it. That's one of my rules. If I put it on there, I may take somebody's word, but I still won't publish it without putting eyes on it. Trust but verify.
Yeah.
Because they may not have any nefarious reason behind it, but they could make a mistake, and
yep, absolutely.
So
yeah, and unfortunately locked gates are kind of a bad problem in our state, especially when it comes to our discipline, what we like to do. I don't know how many times I've been doing exactly what you say. You just kind of sit around when you got some free time, and I do the same thing, just pull up Google Earth or whatever. I'm looking around saying, hey, here's a road. I know this road over here that's kind of near it. Man, it'd be fun to connect this with this and start looking through. And you can find so many different county roads that would work. And once you put the work in, like you say, and you actually go out and ride it, you find so many places where there's a gate that's been up for 40 years. And
that's right.
You go through our Country Roads Coalition, the SWAT system to try to report that gate. And it seems like the Department of Highways in West Virginia doesn't want to do anything with it. They don't want to bother the 40-year-old farmer, the farm that's been there for that many years. And I know at least in our area up here in the northern part of the state, it seems like the DOH doesn't want to do their job.
Yeah. I'm friends with Jerry Bain. He's with the Country Roads Coalition. Yep. And, we do share a lot of our frustrations and, in the South, you'll run into gates. There's several issues I've found on some of my, on some of my routes that people's throwing up gates. But up north, you don't have the OHV. I don't know if I want to use the term culture or at least the network that you have down south. I could very well not have my routes and people would still have tons of riding to do. You may have to do the Hatfield-McCoy trails, but, it's still, you can still go have fun. The further north you go, because West Virginia has not a lot of national forest. I mean, we do have the Mong National Forest,
mm-hmm.
In comparative to, Virginia with the George Washington and Jefferson, there's just a lot more national forest than in West Virginia. West Virginia, you rely heavily on the good graces of landowners, down south. Like I said, a lot of what we were riding when I was young were, private property. It was mining, timbering, and gas that they just let you ride. Now most of that property is now Hatfield McCoy, which but up north, the further north you go, the less areas that you have to ride, and makes it that much more important to if it is a county road to make sure that we do have access to that. So those guys are doing really good work.
Yeah, that's kind of why I really took it upon myself to be the district rep for Marion County here, where we're based out of, just because, I mean, a lot of what we ride it's fun. It gets boring to us after you ride it so many times, but to bring a new guy in to see all the cool stuff that we have. And like Trevor was saying earlier, man, we got stuff that goes from here in Fairmont all the way down to Canaan Valley and hits maybe 3 or 4 miles of hardtop the entire way. And the stuff like that, we got to try to protect what we can. And I know we had an issue there a couple of weeks back where one of the local fly fishing shops put up some kind of BS signage to try to keep guys out of White Day Creek, one of our absolute staple roads up here that we have to have. And it was nice to see that come to a peaceful solution, and it wasn't something that was going to hamper our riding efforts up here, at least.
Yeah, that's when's best, is when you can just make it work,
Yeah. Yeah, we don't have that much, like you said, especially up our way, man. There's not much national forest or designated trails, so we got to try to everybody share what we have, and it was nice to see that work out.
Yeah, I've said it on a previous podcast episode. It's not fly fishermen versus OHV users versus anybody else. It's all of us versus land development companies, housing developments, et cetera, that are buying up property left and right. And, you can't do anything with it after that.
I always tell everybody right now, whether you realize it or not, and this is just my opinion, which means absolutely nothing, but you're actually, to me, in the golden age of adventure riding and dual sporting right now.
Yep,
we're
living
it. And the reason I say that is no matter where we go in the future, I feel like we're not gaining any more access anywhere, or if anything, we're losing access.
Yep.
So you have that, loss of access to these areas, coupled on top of, just like you said, the natural progression of development, housing developments going in, and let's face it, a lot of these areas, people like their asphalt roads, and I don't blame them. Go buy a $80,000 car. You don't want to go beating down an old dirt, gravel road and get it nasty. I get it. Unfortunately, as it progresses and people put up houses and move into these areas, the roads are going to get better. And, like I said, and right now we have the best choices of adventure bikes, dual sports that we've ever had. Everybody can go back to if they just made the XR 650R again, which is a wonderful bike in its own right. But, there's options today that's just as good, if not better.
Hey, take it from the guy who was a diehard XR 650R guy. That was my first dual sport I ever had. Absolutely loved the thing until I bought my KTM 500 EXC and realized it had just as much power, electric start, way lighter, better brakes, and all around just a way better bike. And I don't miss it one bit.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Yep. There's I have a soft spot for a thumper, but at the end of the day, we've moved on beyond that. And our choices of ADV bikes are the best we've ever had, and they're only getting better. I mean, that's what I say, and if we look at overlanding as a whole, there we go with that buzzword again. I mean, everybody almost now has an off-road model that they offer. Some are better than the others, whether it's a Toyota, Ford with the new Bronco and the Raptor, and Chevrolet with the ZR2s and Jeep. I mean, you've always had Jeep, and, everybody goes back to the, the Jeeps. The TJ was the best Jeep. Well, why was it the best Jeep? It had a 4.0, 4.0, which is hard to keep. I know I'm going to probably get some hate mail for this. 4.0 was a great motor, but it was 160 horsepower. The new motor.
Hey man, my Cherokee's got the 4.0 HO. That's good for another 30 horsepowers.
So you got 190. Okay. And they're great motors in their own right. But that Pentastar runs really good. My diesel Gladiator runs really good. That little 4-cylinder in my wife's JL runs really good. So, I mean, everybody can go back to the teary-eyed days of, thinking that, yesteryear was better, but, we live in a pretty good, gear. Take your pick. You're not trying to make do with motocross gear and, putting a frog tog on the outside of it or rain gear. Now you've got Climb and Dyneese and all those people.
We have all these options across the board that, people before us would have killed for. And it's like, nobody appreciates it. Everyone's, focused on, well, if this was just, a touch better in this way or something like that, but it's leagues beyond what has been offered in the past.
Absolutely. One of the guys that rode with us this weekend, I'd never met him, talked to him on Facebook, was friends with him on Facebook. He rode down from Beckley in the pouring rain and it didn't have a stitch of true motorcycle gear on. It shows you that you don't have to have this stuff to have a good time. He was on a 77 XT 500.
So
had an open face helmet and didn't, and was wearing just regular rain gear, and it was cold Saturday. So, he really impressed me and rode the piss out of that XT 500.
I caught some glimpses of that because, if you've been in the dual sport and adventure industry or kind of brotherhood, so to speak, in this state, then you've come across Jeff Wright, aka Gabby, and he was. So I'm friends with him on Facebook and you, obviously. I seen your guys' pictures and videos, and I was like, man, that guy's got balls of steel on that thing. I'd love to spend some time with that dude. And I believe those guys were calling that the tour to kill the old guys. Is that what it was referred to?
That was kind of the that was kind of the nickname they gave it. So we had, Steve was, I guess, in his 60s, and Gabby's in his 60s, and Mike Day, my friend Mike, he's in his 60s. So yeah, we had some older guys there that, we was just trying to, give them warm memories to keep them, warm at night when they even get older, when their bones get a little achy.
Yep. Yeah, it looked like a good time, man. And, obviously it's a pretty good segue into what we're getting ready to get ourselves into this weekend with your Tour De Coalfields route. And, I'm not sure when that came about, and we'll kind of get into that, but, a couple guys in our group did it like 2 or 3 years ago, I think it was. And I just remember seeing that and thinking, putting that in the back of my mind, like that's something I definitely want to go do. And, my schedule is kind of crazy with work, family, etc., and I don't have that many weekends to go on a big long trip like this, especially with our ride that we put on, 3 or 4 detour. And I want to make it a point that we're just going to do the Tour De Coalfields this year. So, like we was kind of talking about earlier, be about 11 of us go down there in what's going to probably be an absolute downpour, torrential, cold mess this weekend. But I'm excited for it, man. Can't wait. So, talk us through the Tour De Coalfields, how that came about, and what kind of some of the highlights are, and just kind of an overall explanation of it and what we're going to get ourselves into this weekend.
All right, so the Tour De Coalfields come out of, like I said earlier, everybody coming up with these routes, the BDR, the TAT, other routes that went, and none of them went through Southern West Virginia. It's kind of other than the guys coming in on side by sides and dirt bikes, it's a neglected area that has, it's really for dual sporting or even jeeping, off-roading. It's a hidden gem, and nobody was capitalizing on it. And, being a native of Southern West Virginia, I felt like we were very well underrepresented as far as this type of riding goes. It's one thing to see a guy on a dirt bike going back and forth, but if you can get those people coming in that are overlanders or dual sporters or even adventure riders, they have a tendency of spending more money and have more of a greater network than just the guys coming into the Hatfield-McCoy. Because at the end of the day, Hatfield-McCoy is a trail system that is managed, and that's has its benefits too, but there's something just special about going from point A to point B to point C to D and not being hampered by staying on trail 131, 132, and staying within this area. There's something that just, if you enjoy dual sporting and adventure riding, you'll probably get it. You'll understand what I'm talking about, of just going from here to there. So really want to do that. Growing up, my stepdad owned a surveying company, so I was on a lot of these roads surveying, and then had an idea of, okay, well, that's a county road. I remember that from working for him, in my youth, and then coupled on top of that, working in the coal industry. My last job in the coal industry, I was corporate safety for United Coal. So, I'd get done with my work at the end of the day, and I'd go full on at the end of the day. If we had operations in Elkins and we had some in southern West Virginia, and I didn't have anything else to do, well, let's see where this road goes. And then you'd find good roads, and then you'd go and pull it up on the map, and it's like, hey, that's a county road.
Yep.
And you just got an idea. It's like, okay, well, if I can go from here to there, and then I can find a place to here, then I can make a pretty nice loop.
Yep.
And, like I said, when you make these loops, it's not just getting from A to B. That is important, but you have to make A to B make sense. Why are you taking them to each point? What do you want them to see? What do you want them to experience? Remember these places, the people's probably not from here. Where do they eat? Where do they get fuel? Where can they stay? Every time you make these routes, you have to keep that in mind.
Yep.
It's not just, I want to make you a good route and then leave you hanging. It's, okay, you're not from here. You need to get gas. This, it needs to swing by there. So there's a lot of thought process in behind it. But like I said, I wanted to really show, and you'll see it this weekend, the differences in, the name is Tour De Coalfields. You'll get to see the difference in the progression of how different everybody who thinks West Virginia, southern West Virginia is all the same, and it's not. It's a very diverse area. You're going to start in Mercer County, which was really the birthplace of coal mining in southern West Virginia. That's where it really started at, because that's where the railroad started. So you're going to get to see the really, really vintage stuff, and you're going to move over to McDowell County, and it's about the same. So you're going to get to see a lot of areas that were mined, and that right now you may say, ooh, at first glance, it looks nasty. But then when you start looking at some of the architecture of the buildings and realizing that, that in their heyday, this would have been the place to be. And then you're going to move to Wyoming County, which is different than McDowell. You're going to roll into Raleigh. You're going to be going from the flat top Pocahontas field to the Winding Gulf field, and then you're going to roll out of the Winding Gulf field to the New River field, and you're going to get to see those. And so then you're going to step back in time again, because that New River field was one of the first ones to start up too. That was really early. And, now with that New River Valley up through there is just beautiful. It's now a national park. So a lot of good things up through there that's been kept. And then you're going to meander back up through the Greenbrier field, and you're going to see that, how much different it is, and get to really at what I would say the very southern part of the West Virginia Highlands, up in Greenbrier County, up towards, Beach Knob, you're hitting 4,000 feet up in it. And you're just going to get to see a very diverse area in southern West Virginia that, if you pay attention to what you're seeing, you're going to see that it's way different. Greenbrier County, you may have a coal mine up on the mountain, but it's surrounded by farms. You won't typically see that in McDowell County. There's certain areas in Wyoming County you'll see that, and some in Raleigh, but for the most part, McDowell, Logan, which doesn't go through there, but Boone, they're not really big agricultural areas, so there's no stark contrast. Whereas Greenbrier County is a very stark contrast county.
That's awesome, man. We're, like I said, I'm so pumped. I'm looking forward to it.
Same.
I know.
Well, I'm excited for you guys. And like I said, there's some good routes. There's some good areas there. Yes, there's probably better riding, because somebody's like, well, why didn't you go up this road? It's a lot better because that was a private road. We go back to that. Yes, that's a better road, but it's private. But no, I'm really excited.
You
Yeah,
touched
we are too, man.
Go ahead, James. I'm
No,
sorry.
you get, I'm good, Trevor. Go ahead.
You touched on architecture and stuff like that, and that's something that is probably one of my favorite parts of getting out and riding is getting back in the middle of nowhere and coming across like foundations of old cabins, or we rode up on fan houses from old mines, or like old railroad infrastructure just out in the middle of nowhere. And for me, that's one of the more interesting parts of it. My granddad worked CSX Railroad for, I don't know, I think 30 or 40 years or something like that. And he's told me about these places and stuff way out in the middle of nowhere that, you know, like I said, there's old fan houses, old switch gear and stuff like that. And it's just really cool to get out and see.
Yep. I know up
Absolutely.
our way too. Another unfortunate area that's kind of hard to get into due to the illegal gating going on, but the old ghost town brick place of Hammond up here
in
in
West
Fairmont.
Virginia.
And it's kind of the same deal. It's a really cool place to get down there on a Dualsport adventure bike. And it's really personal for me because my grandmother grew up in the town of Hammond. Her dad was one of the workers in the brick plant there. And it was really cool. I know before she passed away, when I was still a kid, was able to take my dad's old CJ, I think it was a 46 CJ, down in there with my grandma and get her a couple of the old Hammond bricks that says Fairmont, West Virginia on it.
Yeah, I've got some Hammond bricks from the 3 different companies that owned that once upon a time. They're marked Tigert, I think Fairmont WVA, and one's marked Resist. But back when I was in college, we were down there almost every weekend when the weather was nice in the spring and the fall. And man, it was just such a great place to go out for a day and mess around. All the trails kind of loop back on each other. But it had everything: mud, some hill climbs, rock gardens. It was pretty scenic, pretty out of the way. And it's really unfortunate that that land management company came back and, of course, gated the whole thing up. And it's really difficult to get into, like James said.
Yeah. Lannie, I know, you know, and us doing our research for the Tour De Coalfields, obviously, one of the first things a lot of people want to do is get on YouTube and look up a video of what we're getting ready to get into. And I know there's a few out there that are pretty good for the Tour De Coalfields. And from what I've seen, man, there's some pretty rough looking endless rock gardens. So what are some of the really bad sections that we're looking forward to? Because that's what us FDSR guys like. We like the gnarly stuff, man. So let us know.
So on the western end of it, we have a section called Mutiny Hill.
That's one of the ones I wanted to touch on for sure.
Yeah. So the reason it's called Mutiny Hill is I was doing a big ride one day. We had probably 13 people in that, you know, from everywhere: Raleigh, North Carolina, Lynchburg, Virginia, for just people from everywhere. So we started up through there, and it, you know, mind you, it's a county road. And, you know, I've been up through there, and I think it's called Milam Fork Black Road or something like that. Well, anyway, you go up through there and you come by somebody's house. I mean, it goes right beside somebody's house. And you go up and then it starts getting tougher and tougher and tougher. And then you make a right-hand curve, and then, you know, looking at you at the time, it's gotten a little bit better since then. You know, you were looking at a 2-foot vertical rock face that you had to try to get up over. And it's all clay, wet, mud. It's just nasty. So the reason it's called Mutiny Hill is because basically I almost had a mutiny on my hands. I mean, people were physically mad that we were in that area. And, I just had to set everybody down and said, listen, you know, you're looking at probably a quarter mile of it being rough. And then once you get up here on top, it levels out and it's pretty good. And then another 2 miles from there, you're back on hardtop. So, I mean, they were physically mad. And I said, hey, guys, listen, we're here to have fun. If you're not having fun, don't do it. If you feel like this is putting you at risk of getting hurt and you're riding over your head, you don't need to be here. I don't want you to be here because I don't want you to get hurt. Yeah. I'll show you the route. I'll show you a section where you can meet us at, and, you go up there and wait on us, and, you can ride the hardtop and meet us there. But they were physically mad. I mean, just almost ready to beat me because we went up there. And I said, guys, if you just make it a quarter mile, it took about an hour or so to get everybody up because everybody was dropping their bikes. And you'll see it on one of my videos on Adventure Horizons channel on YouTube, you'll see the section that's Mutiny Hill, and
Yep.
you'll see everybody dropping their bikes.
Oh yeah, I've watched that several times, man. It's pretty good stuff on there for
it's
sure.
Doable. People's done it on. There's one guy that went up there and done it on a big bike. He had a 790, and some other guys a 790 or 890, and some other guys did it on a Triumph. So I mean, it's doable. It's not even, when it's raining, it's a little bit tougher, but there's that section. I'm sorry.
It's probably going to be raining whenever we come through.
Yeah,
that way.
it probably be pretty rough. There's that section, and then there's the next tough section would be that I would consider tough. You probably don't hit really tough until you get over nailing. That's
where we're starting. That's where we're starting our ride at.
There's really a rough road over there that's got a lot of rocks in it, and it's always wet, and that gets pretty nasty. The other section is Molly Road. Used to be really nasty.
Yeah,
you get that Greenbrier County red clay because you're right there. You're underneath. You're in the Mississippian formation at that point, so you get a lot of that red clay that that you would find typically down south. So it gets a little slick right there. I don't know I haven't been through there in a while to tell you what it's like. There's one section. Oh, you'll love Pipestem Creek. Somebody will drop their bike. If you don't, let me know. Yeah. Everybody I've known's dropped their bike in that creek. It's we did the TAT in 2018, and and I've rode a lot, and that's the slickest creek I've ever been in. The slickest. It's probably, I don't know, 20, 30 yards wide. The water's about maybe an inch and a half deep, and it's polished.
Did you just go across like a big flat rock?
Like a countertop.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Those are always
slick. Yeah, it's slick. So
yeah, if everybody comes that says they're going to come, I mean, most of our bikes are either KTM 350s or 500 EXCs. If our buddy Mark comes, he'll be bringing his diesel KLR 650.
Oh, sweet. That'll be interesting.
And then my poor buddy Luke from work will be bringing his Tenere 700. So I'm sure that thing's going to be fun wrestling through some stuff.
He'll be fine. That Tenere's.
Well, Luke's gotten a lot better, but he's fairly new.
I got you. All my routes, are a work in progress. I never consider them finished. Number one, you can't because one of my portions of the red route, the red section starting out, it's closed off due to mining right now. There's nothing I can do about that.
Yeah, that's
so I'm always looking. I'm sorry.
That's something me and you talked about just a couple of days ago because you made sure that we were going to go around that stuff, I appreciate that.
It's always trying to look for a better route. Try to make sure that they get a better experience. I don't know if you've looked at any of my other routes, but all the routes I have, I try to make them where if you don't want to ride my route, then you can kind of pick and choose from each route because they all essentially pretty much interconnect in a certain way. What do I mean by that? Well, my flagship, which I thought was my flagship route, the Trans-Virginian Trail, the TVAT, which was over 1,000 miles. It runs from the coast of Virginia all the way to Point Pleasant, West Virginia. I always considered that was my, crowning achievement of putting that together. But it seems the Tour De Coalfields is more popular. It runs from the east to west. Well, I also have the Shenandoah Trail that runs. It pretty much parallels the BDR. It's just more off-road than BDR. It's tougher.
Yeah.
Runs up to Harper's Ferry and it goes all the way down to Damascus, Virginia. Actually, I'm lying. It goes all the way to Mountain City, Tennessee. So it goes a little further than the BDR. So they crisscross. You're here right where I live at here in Roanoke. They crisscross. So you could very well say, okay, well, I want to take this route from the Eastern Virginia, the Eastern Shore. I want to take it to Roanoke, and then I want to go north to DC. Or I want to go to Roanoke, and I don't really want to go to Point Pleasant or go to across West Virginia. I want to go to Tennessee, so I can go down to Tennessee, or I can go all the way to West Virginia Virginia and say, okay, well, I want to go this far. And there's sections on the TVAT that overlap and connect with the Tour De Coalfields. So you can go there and be like, okay, I don't want to go here, but I want to make a loop around Tour De Coalfields. So, there is some sanity to how I do my routes, because I like things that way that you can plan and customize your own route, and you can put it together and say, this is what I want to do. I really don't want to go here because I know that, but I want to go from here to here and then to here.
Yeah. I know that was something that I found really interesting, because I looked up your website, obviously, whenever I first wanted to try to look at the Tour De Coalfields. And I seen you also had the Virginia routes, and I clicked on it, and I was like, man, there's like 5 or 6 different routes here in Virginia. And once I really started getting into it, I was like, holy crap, it goes all the way from the coast clear out over into West Virginia. So, yeah, definitely some really good Virginia stuff.
I've got, I think, close to mid 2,000 miles of trails and working on towards 3,000, so, that's, the website's not that good. I'm not a website designer, but it is somewhere that, if you want routes, you can get there and download them, and they're there.
Well, one thing that I appreciate, because I don't like when people use this is a term that I know we've used on the show before, but gatekeeping, where you have a paywall or something to keep people from experiencing a route, especially something like our routes here with the county road stuff. And the fact that you offer all that stuff as a free download is awesome. And it's something that I know a lot of us really, really appreciate. Something else that, I want to kind of get into, I've seen on the website there that I don't know if you obviously you still kind of do it, but I feel for you as far as doing like a guided ride. Is that something you still do anymore?
If somebody wants it, I will. But, unfortunately, guided routes are typically, you'll find the ADV riders. They typically have deeper pockets than Dualsport guys. They're typically not as cheap. So ADV riders will typically, they want to go out. They typically have a little bit more white collar jobs. So when they come out, they don't want to have to do anything, here.
Yeah.
I don't, whereas us Dualsport guys, it's like, hey, I don't need somebody taking me around. I'll just ride myself. ADV riders typically are a little bit more, hey, I want you to show me. The only problem with that is there's so many laws a lot of people don't understand, that once it gets in the national forest and the national forest gets involved, then you got to get permits, and they will never give you a permit for a tour guide. So it gets very complicated. So most of the time it's there, but it's not something that I do on the on a lot of basis.
I know our first year that we did our 304 detour ride, it was a guided ride, and literally within 5 minutes of us starting that off, I realized how bad of an idea this was to try to lead 77 people through all this different stuff that we had. And let me tell you, year 2, it was roll charts and arrows and everything else on the trails, and you figure it out yourself, because it was an absolute disaster.
Because at the end of the day, you're dealing with people, and no matter what, when you get that many people, there's always going to be some issue. Some guy who didn't fill up their fuel tank the night before, needs to get gas. Somebody who didn't do maintenance on their ride, and now stuff's falling off of it, and you got to deal with that. Somebody that, typically when I ride, you're always responsible for the person behind you. When you can't see the person behind you, you're supposed to stop. So it's kind of, a chain reaction. You always get somebody who doesn't do that. Well, I was afraid of getting left. And so then they leave that person. It's just, it is a tough place to have to do that.
Yeah.
If you do it, you're typically better off doing small groups. And like I said, the ADV guys are going to be more of the guys that are going to pay you to show them.
Yeah.
So,
well, let's touch a little bit on your current fleet. What's your bikes that you have right now that you use? I know one's a KTM, is a 450 or 500. I know you were calling it like the Franken bike or something on one of the videos up there.
So I don't have Franken bike anymore. Franken bike was called that because it was a combination of many things. It started out life as a 450 SX, And then the motor was locked up, and I stripped it down and bought a 450 MXC motor, because it was an RFS motor. And it had a 450 MXC motor in it with all kinds of EXC parts. So it was just a hodgepodge of everything. I mean, it was basically a custom built bike, and I loved that bike, and it held a soft spot in my heart. But it gets to the point where no matter what, it was still an old bike, and you're dealing with parts that you didn't put brand new on everything. And I just get to the point where my time is precious, and I don't have time to wrench on that. I want to be able to hit the start button with little maintenance and go ride. And that probably would have been fine in my 20s when I enjoyed it. Now that I'm in my 40s, I just want to ride. And so now my current bike, or the current bikes that's in the Hooiser household, is I ride a Husqvarna 501. So that's my Dualsport. I have a GSA 1250, brand new one. My wife has a GS 650 single, and then she has an XT 250. So
cool.
So she's got as many bikes as I do right now.
Pretty nice, well-rounded stable.
Yeah.
I've got a big bike for big bike stuff. I've got a little bike. She's got a big bike for big stuff, little bike for little bike. And she rides. She's good. She did the TAT with me in 2018. She rode from Virginia all the way to Oregon on her own bike.
Awesome. That's awesome. That's
on an XT 250. Went across the country on an XT 250.
Yep.
That's awesome. That's definitely, we interviewed our buddy Billy Tayo there a couple weeks back and talked to him about his TAT experience, and that's definitely ignited the fire for me, so to speak. That's definitely a bucket list trail that I want to try to do before I kick the bucket.
It's definitely an experience that everybody who does adventure riding should think about. At least do it once. I wouldn't do it again, but I'm glad I did it.
Yeah. I think if it were me, I'd have to find a way to get to Oregon and do it backwards and coming home. If I had that in my mindset that I was constantly getting closer to the house every single day, it would push me to keep on going, I think.
That's not a bad way to think. And I know a guy that did that. The only problem I see with that is for me, the temptation to just skip a lot of stuff and get home would be too great, because I'll be honest with you. The riding's pretty good in the East, but Western Tennessee is terrible. It's not good. Northern Mississippi was okay. A good portion of Arkansas wasn't any good. The Ozarks was okay. I liked Eastern Oklahoma a lot. It reminded you of kind of around here, kind of hilly, really nice. And I enjoyed Oklahoma, but when you spend 3 or 4 days trying to get across to Oklahoma, you're ready for it to be done. I mean, period. The novelty of looking around and seeing nothing but sky is worn off. Now, it's cool when you first come out there, especially being from a mountainous area where we're from, and then go out there and look, and it's just sky and dirt. That's cool. But by the third day, you're done. And you're like, why am I doing this?
Yep.
And then you instantly, it's no lie, you go from Oklahoma and you cross over into New Mexico, and within a mile, life is instantly better. The terrain changes, and then you start coming in, and all of a sudden the valley opens up, and you're looking at this big open rocky canyon valley that is typically what you would expect to see in a high desert area. And then you're like, this is why I'm doing that. And then you go down through there in that little section of New Mexico, coming in and get back up on the plateau in Colorado, and then you can see the Rockies, and then life is better. Then you're excited for doing it. Yeah. Because I'm telling you, going across to Oklahoma, it just, in that whole section of really nothing in the middle, it's neat in its own mind, but if in its own way, but if you can keep it down to 1 or 2 days and be there, but then when you see the Rockies, and then from Trinidad, Colorado, all the way to Port Orford, Oregon, is just, one thing after another. Just, this is awesome. This is awesome. This is awesome. So I would be afraid of getting all starting with, and then get
bored.
You get into Oklahoma and be like, "Whoa." You know, if I had to recommend to anybody, what I would recommend them doing, unless you just had it in your mind that you had to do it all at once, I would probably, if I would ever do it again, I would do it in two sections. I would run out, take 2 weeks, ride the east to about Oklahoma, and then ship my bike back and come back. Or even if you spent 2 days riding back. And then I would ship my bike out to Oklahoma and then finish the rest.
Yeah. I thought about that too. That's pretty common for people that hike like the PCT, Appalachian Trail and stuff like that. They'll section hike it as opposed to through hiking it. And that's something that made a lot more sense to me for doing the TAT, because it's pretty difficult to get that block of time off in a single stint to be able to go do it.
Yeah, especially.
Yeah. And if you know that you get Oklahoma, you know in 3 days it's going to be over, then it's not so bad. But then when you're doing 3 days in Oklahoma and then you really don't understand at that point, you're like, why am I doing this? And yeah, I can tell you right now that seeing the Rockies is the best feeling in the world.
Yeah.
But until you've done it, you're just like, all right, somebody's just, he's full of crap.
Yeah.
But that would be my recommendation. I would probably do it again in 2 sections.
That's awesome, man. So, obviously the TAT was a really good experience for you. Is there any other, dual sport events or trails that you've done that you'd recommend to anybody?
If you're wanting to start, if you have anybody starting out, the BDR is good. The MA BDR, if you're starting out, you want to see, and that would be for a starters, somebody wanting to get the taste of it.
Yeah.
Because even though I feel, and I'm completely biased here, I feel like my Shenandoah Trail Southern Highlands is a better route than the BDR. It is rougher. So if you're starting out, you probably would want to do the BDR first. And even starting out, I wouldn't recommend doing the Trans-Virginian, because especially that central West Virginia part where you start hitting that central West Virginia mud, it gets pretty nasty. So some of the BDRs is good. Some of, hey, go down to March Moto Madness. That's a good way of meeting people. That's fun. The Smoky Mountain 500. I've not done the events that they have, but I have rode some of the routes. Man, it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
That's a beautiful area. My friend Terry Rafferty, he puts on really good rides at Gearhead Junction in Pearisburg, Virginia.
Okay. Yep. I know who that is.
Yeah. It's super, just fantastic guy, does a lot for the industry. Just a very good steward of the industry. Very, very happy that he's involved with dual sporting and adventure riding. He puts on good events. He's got the Frosty Fender No Name Rally. I mean, those are just fun times. He feeds you good. He gives you all the alcohol you can about drink. I mean, it's just a very, very good environment to be around. Cool. And you get to meet a lot of people. I've met people, made friends. Some of my best friends I've been made on the back of a bike.
Yep. Same here, man. It's really funny how small the circle is once you start going to these different events and stuff. You just see the same people over and over again. And when we put our event on, it's the same people coming back again and again. They become friends too. I know Chad Johnson's coming riding with us this weekend. Dan Farnsworth, a bunch of those guys they've been to our ride every single year. You get to be friends with those guys, and it's really cool, because I think a lot of times my bike friends are more my friends than my actual normal non-bike friends.
That's definitely something that I've thought about too. I think it's born out of having not just a common hobby, but a common purpose. We all go out and decide we're going to get into the gnarliest, worst possible trails the area has to offer. There's a level of trust you have to have in your riding buddies that you don't necessarily have to have, if you guys are just going to go out for a short hike at a national or a state park or something like that. And, it's all of us versus terrain. It's going to be all of us versus Mutiny Hill. It's going to be that common purpose. And, it's going to be all of us versus James at Mutiny Hill, I think is how it's going to end up being. But
Yeah.
But it's not just that. Coming from the fire service, and James, you can even understand this being in the coal mines. It is having a common purpose and common interest that does have something involved into it. But also, when you're out there, you're relying on those people to help you. If you have a breakdown, you got to know that person's going to just not, run off, be like, hey, have fun, and leave you stranded. Or if something happens, you get hurt. These people, with adventure riding, dual sporting, and overlanding, you are truly your brother's keeper at that point.
Yep.
You have a responsibility to the next rider to help them. And with that creates a bond. Yeah, it may not be as strong as being in the fire service or police or in the military or something like that, but it is a bond that goes beyond just, hey, there's my neighbor Dan that I come over and we watch basketball together and drink beer. It's a little bit deeper than that.
Yep, for sure. So we're kind of getting up on an hour now, which is usually where we run our show to. But what are some of the future plans that you have for your routes and adventure horizons?
If COVID hadn't happened, I had intended on pushing the TVAT, which it'll expand into something else. I didn't plan on putting it to the Mississippi River. Well, COVID just kind of killed that. So right now it's just one of those things of just trying to pick a direction which way I want to go and extend some routes. Not necessarily if I have to get it done now. It's one of those things. Okay, well, I want to see this area. I'm going to go down there and make a route and ride it or drive it with my Jeep or whatever. And if it's a good route, we'll publish it, and it's a viable route, and it's public. Absolutely, and put it out there.
Cool. All right, man. We got just a couple comments here. Let's see. Rob and Lissa, who we interviewed a couple weeks back. So they don't have any non-bike friends, maybe one or two. And I would believe that.
Yeah.
None of them two.
Well, you get involved in the hobby heavily. It's kind of difficult to do stuff outside of, you spend so much time riding, you're not going to meet a lot of people that don't have common interests in that regard. If you're out riding every weekend, you're not going to end up being best friends with somebody that's like a fly fisherman or something like that.
That's
you're
true.
End up being best friends with people that ride.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else, Trevor, before we sign off tonight?
No. My question was going to be about the whole stable deal. So I will say that's something that we've touched on in the past about, instead of trying to have one bike to do it all, having one street legal enduro bike and then one adventure bike, as opposed to trying to roll two very different, end goals into a single machine and having to make all the compromises.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely do the same thing with that cheap old Kawasaki Versus that I still try to take on rough off-road stuff and beat my brains out on, but it gets the job done. It was super cheap, and it's a really good commuter bike too.
So that's all I got.
Cool, man. Well, Lannie, we appreciate you coming on here with us tonight and spending your evening with us. We'll see what happens this coming weekend, man. It's going to be a heck of an adventure, I'm sure.
Take a lot of videos and take a lot of pictures and let me know how it goes.
We certainly will, man. I got the crew with all the GoPros, and we'll put together a pretty good video. Like I said, man, appreciate you coming on tonight. Hopefully we can get together and do some riding here sometime soon, man.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we appreciate everybody watching tonight, and as always, we'll see you next Tuesday. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for your time.
Thank y'all.